Joan Burton.
Can I begin by saying, yes, I do know James Connolly. James Connolly was a good Republican, unlike Slab Murphy, whom some describe as a good Republican. The Labour Party, Ceann Comhairle, will seek to amend the government motion before the House tonight. But I want to be clear that my party supports, in principle, the decision made at government, eventually, to appeal this case. At one level, and it's been clear from all that was said by some deputies in this House already today and by much of the commentary in the last week, that this has been a very difficult issue to grapple with. For my own party, it's certainly not an easy position to reach. The prospect of an additional €13 billion plus is certainly a hugely attractive one. And there's nobody in this House, sitting on any side, who couldn't find really important social issues to spend the money on. But in reality, when I say it's a prospect, that's all it is, a prospect. We know that the case will be appealed by Apple. It will be determined in due course by the European courts, many years from now, probably. And it's simply nonsensical to suggest that we as a country should not be party to the appeal, while the reputation of one of the most important agencies of our state is under scrutiny and review, and indeed under challenge. The only way this money becomes available to Ireland is at the end of that judicial process. And, of course, they know that. But the same people who then talked about mock patriotism, brave Irish patriots, they're the people who wanted to send the Troika home in 2011, and I quote, "take your money with you." They would have broken the country, crippled the country in 2011. I'm confident that the Irish people understand the realities behind this decision. I've spoken to many of them in the last week. As I said, the easy thing for my party to do would be to take the populist line. But it wouldn't be the right thing, and it wouldn't be in the long-term interest of our people. And the one thing, if you look back over the decades of the existence of my party, over 100 years, is we've always done right by our country, rather than always put the interests of our party first, as some consistently do, even if it means prolonging conflict. €13 billion plus interest is a lot of money, but it represents only 2 years of corporation tax payments and 6% of 1 year's GDP. While the size of that figure has shaped much of the debate, because it is, for all of us, a mind-numbingly large figure, it is true that there are bigger issues at stake in this debate. The Labour Party did not play a central part in putting this economy back on an even keel over the last 5 years, to play politics with it now. Apple will argue that they arranged their tax affairs in accordance with rules afforded them by our revenue commissioners. Make no mistake about it, Alas Ceann Comhairle, there are reputational issues at stake here. As a small, open economy, hugely dependent on foreign direct investment, reputational issues are extremely important, and any of us who have been privileged to be involved in negotiations to attract companies into this country know that full well. The position of the Irish authorities, and I think it should help the House to debate the matter rationally, that these are administrative decisions made by independent and competent authorities rather than political decisions. And they have determined, they have told us that there is no special, no selective arrangement afforded to Apple. And having known and worked with the Irish Revenue for 3 decades, I, for one, accept their word on these matters. And on the face of it, aspects of the Commission decision are troubling, as other deputies have indicated. They seem to want to interpret the law as it is now, as opposed to how it was at the time. And no obfuscation by saying that's the way they operate in terms of competition rule will apply. No tax system can work on the basis. You couldn't go to any citizen and say, oh, by the way, the tax position that we determined for you 20 years ago, we've changed our minds on it, and we want all that tax back with interest over the last 20 years. They want the revenue commissioners to collect taxes on monies not earned in this jurisdiction, to the point, as others have said, of issuing a call, a come-all-ye call, for others who believe that they have a legitimate claim on this money to come knocking on Ireland's door. How can that work for us? How are we supposed to collect money, and certainly how are we supposed to spend money, when we don't know the beginning or end of how much of it is actually rightfully ours? And yet there seems to be a belief that Ireland, a small nation, should carry the reputational hit for correcting what is an issue, and that we've all agreed is an issue. We are told this is an investigation under state rules. Yet the lion's share of the commentary since the announcement of the Commission's decision has been about taxation levels. The same sort of commentary we've heard for many, many years about corporation tax policy in Ireland. It's a dishonest charge levelled against us by those who seek to do us harm. And those who would be complicit in it do Ireland harm, and the prospect of continuing to be the success we have in attracting investment into this country. But it is the mud that sticks, the mud that is thrown often enough. The truth is that this state collects higher than average revenue from corporation taxes and implements at a national level an effective tax rate higher than other countries, with bigger systems of reliefs that don't seem to be the focus of the Commission's overview, a point made, I think, rather effectively in the case of France by Deputy Micheál Martin. As Dan O'Brien and other commentators have pointed out, there's a growing trend in the European Commission rulings to find against smaller countries while ignoring potential breaches elsewhere. That should give every member of this House pause for thought before automatically rushing to agree with the Commission. It is interesting that there's some in this House who believe that they're entitled to come with a fixed position in this House, but the rest of us are not. That their view is so right that they're entitled to have it, but we're not. The reality is that Ireland has been an upfront and honest engager in the process established to address the wrongs of excessive international tax practices. I'm proud to be a member of a government that put an end to the so-called double Irish. Ireland has been uniquely successful, as I've said, in attracting foreign direct investment. Our corporate tax levels have been part of that attraction over the last decades. But we have moved to compete for FDI on a much broader basis in recent times. And FDI, make no mistake about it, remains an important part of our economic strategy, our job strategy, and the potential well-being of our people. It is regrettable that the government has not sought to properly engage with the opposition on this matter. We've not seen the ruling of the European Commission in all its detail, and yet we are expected to vote on what is one of the most critical matters to come before this House for a very long time. I've served here for quite some time, but in all my time, I can't recall a situation where a government moved a motion seeking the agreement of the House without at least offering a confidential, detailed briefing to be provided to members here. Dropping a physical copy of a briefing note effectively in the post after the close of business yesterday bluntly doesn't amount to a proper engagement with the opposition. And there's no excuse for such obfuscation on an issue as important as this. And what's more, the government knows that. This isn't a minor procedural matter. Members of the House represent the people of Ireland. If new politics, so-called, is to have any meaning, if collective decision-making or inclusive decision-making is to be real in any sense, then this side of the House cannot be left without possession of all the facts that others have received through briefings. Notwithstanding that, as I've said, the Labour Party is proposing an amendment to this motion, which, Alaska Comhairle, I believe is entirely reasonable, and I think should have the support of all members of the House. In fact, it's so reasonable that the Minister for Finance has acted overnight to give partial effect to one of its proposals. The first part of our amendment insists on continuing government support for the so-called base erosion and profit shifting process, or the BEPS process. In a globalised world, and I make this point, maybe quietly during the contribution of Deputy Adams, that we can't do this alone. We're not going to achieve international tax justice by ourselves. And that's why we have led the charge on this through the BEPS process. Talk to our ambassadors who've been involved in it. But you see, that wouldn't give you any credit. That wouldn't give you any political capital. In government, as I said, we've insisted upon Ireland's continuing support, in fact, its vanguard lead on the OECD process. In opposition, we'll continue to do so. The second part of the amendment recognises that the work we carried out in ending the double Irish is not complete. We've made progress, but some of the loopholes that allow the creation of stateless corporations have been closed, but there is no doubt that this work fed into an increase in the taxation that we've already seen. We saw corporation tax increased from 4.6 billion in 2014 to 6.9 billion in 2015. That was because of closing those loopholes. But it would be foolish, and I accept this, to think that we've finished our work. The moral outrage that we've heard over the last week about companies who avoid paying any tax despite generating huge profits is completely and entirely justified. We cannot expect families or individuals to pay their fair share of tax if companies don't. And so the Labour Party motion amendment calls for the ending of all loopholes in our tax code that facilitate aggressive tax avoidance by profitable companies. And I welcome the reaction of the Minister, who has responded, as I say, overnight to these concerns and announced significant changes to Section 110 of the Taxes Consolidation Act. And we will look at those in detail, and my colleague, no doubt, will have something to say on these. The practices of vulture funds over the last couple of years are completely unacceptable. The dirty deals which have been done, for example, in the Cleary's case, which cast workers adrift overnight, is not acceptable.
On your watch?
This had made, and that's why we changed the law. See, the difference between Labour and others is we like to actually provide solutions, not exploit problems. And that's why the Labour motion, the Labour amendment, also asks that the forthcoming budget include measures to ensure a minimum effective rate of tax on all profitable companies. We have a low rate of corporation tax. That's part of the offering made by a small island nation to entice some of the biggest companies in the world to come here and create jobs. Now, the bottom line is, we compete, as I've seen, we compete with the Singapores and with the Israels for these jobs. There's some here who would throw them away, let them go to Singapore, rather than ensure that we thrive in this country. But real leadership is about ensuring that our country thrives. Not, you see, the problem, Alaska Comhairle, and I'm conscious of time, is that there are those who like always to posit views knowing there's never a consequence for them. But government and leadership is about doing something that has a positive consequence for our people. The work done by my colleague Joan Burton changed the minimum effective tax rate for individuals. We need to do that for companies as well. For today, we're seeking support for just the start of this reforming work, an agreement by the representatives of the people that all profitable companies should pay a real rate of tax that is reasonable. And the final part of the Labour's proposal amendment is perhaps the most important, and yet, in many ways, probably regarded as the least exciting. The Government acknowledges the need to have an overall review of our corporate tax regime, and that's in the Government motion. But they're making the same mistakes others have made in the past, to presume that a once-off review of an ever-changing environment will solve the problem. Issues like the abuse of Section 110, which were not envisaged when Section 110 was enacted, were not created by design. But the abuse of that section, which some corporate law firms have openly advertised on their websites, has already been referenced, should be stopped. Whatever changes we apply to our tax code, there are many people employed to find more loopholes. Based on our experience, it seems odd to suggest that those loopholes won't be found. And so again, the Labour Party proposal is a modest one, but I believe a truly effective one. We want to create an independent commission sitting on a permanent basis that will continue to examine the loopholes being exploited and suggest ways to plug them. There is no reasonable case that we should not continuously examine how to prevent the creation and identification of tax loopholes or aggressive tax avoidance. We stand for levying a fair rate of tax on anyone, companies as well as individual people, and for spending that revenue that we raise from such measures in a fair and compassionate way. I hope that after all the debate, others will agree that the amendments we're proposing are reasonable and that they can attract the support of the House.